to get my code. Yeah, let's go.
One, two, 1, 2. Have your attention, please. We're about to start. Okay. Yeah, I know you love each other and you haven't seen each other for ages, but let's have some decorum, please. It's great to be back in a live setting, meeting up again. My name is Kunle Olulode, if you don't know, and I'm the director of Voice4Change England, one of the organizations behind the Pathway Project. And to my left is Bediako and Chiu, partners from the Black Global Trust and from Chiu. So I think the, did I get that wrong? TSIC, sorry, I always get them confused. Just in terms of housekeeping, the seats are really for people who cannot stand for hours and hours. So if you're feeling a bit infirm, and for people with disabilities, please take the seats, although there are reserved sides. The toilets are just straight out here and turn right, and towards the other side, another set of toilets. In terms of if you need water before we actually bring the refreshments in, there's a canteen just one level below. But I just want to say, to kick off, it's great that so many people have turned out today. If people want to move forward to allow some of the latecomers to take the space at the back, that would be wonderful. The other thing that I'd like to point out is that we are going to be taking some photographs this afternoon. So if you have any objections to having your photograph taken, please let them be known to the photographer on my right here. So that's Sean. So in terms of the project of Pathway, it's been a long time in terms of the direction of travel to get to this point. There's been a lot of modelling, there's been a lot of arguments, there's been a lot of debate. We started this journey, Voice4Change, back in 2015, when we surveyed 100 Black and Minoritised organisations and their experience of funding and the development of income streams. Out of those experiences came a report called Bridging the Gap, which highlighted the difficulties that many were having with trusts and foundations. The report also restated the importance of targeted grant funding, but also recommended that we at Voice4Change specifically consider the role of social investment in developing organizations. And at this point, I'd like to say a big thanks to some of those organizations that helped us in the early days, in particular Barrow Cadbury, and the Connect Fund, the Bearing Foundation, and not least, the National Community Lottery Fund. We've progressed a great deal with a £500,000 development fund, which is, as we're speaking, is being added to, and we hope by the end of this year to have a significant pot that will allow us to really push this fund forward. And with that in mind, I'd like to probably state a number of developments that are happening. The first and important one is the recruitment of our new director. And with that in mind, I'd like to introduce Dilys Winterkorn. Say a few words.
Thanks so much, Kunle. Yeah, just quickly want to say that for me, this is really my career coming full circle. I've worked in fundraising, community development, also designing, delivering grant programs, and what's been the common thread, what's been really important is to understand the requirements and needs of Black and minoritised communities. This conversation isn't new. You know, communities have been talking about this for so long, and I think Pathway is a really important vehicle to make that happen. And I feel really honoured to bring my experience to do that and to really unlock investment for our communities.
So that's the first announcement. I'd like to add to that immediately. In the spring of 2023, we'll be implementing a series of 6 to 8 live pilots. We're not just waiting for the fund to be in place with all 30 million of the, I suppose, the funds that we're looking for, but we want to hit the ground running and make sure that we're able to demonstrate the practicalities of what Pathway has to offer. And with that in mind, I should be going to Nottingham tomorrow. I should be going to Yorkshire over the next few days, talking to community groups, working through, I suppose, what infrastructure support means in the 21st century and how we can use social investment to bring that about. The next thing that I think is going to be important is a new program of contract learning, how to access government contracts, which is being brought together with a partnership with Alistair Wilson over there and his group from the School for Social Entrepreneurs and SE UK, Social Enterprise UK. Again, there's a lot of hard work that's gone into that, and we'll be going into that, looking for an immediate launch in the spring of March 23. In addition to that, again, with Social Enterprise, School for Social Entrepreneurs, we'll be looking at developing a more targeted match trading program, which will offer Black startups and enterprises the opportunity to actually get match funding in relation to increased turnover within the enterprise arena. So those things are not theoreticals. These things are going to be happening. We're not going to be having long-winded debates. They're coming on stream in 2023. The question of Pathway and the fund, I think really for us has been an exciting development, and it's something that the three partners really, we believe, can actually be a game changer. And so that's why we've invited you this afternoon. We've had a private launch with funders and foundations back in September, but from now on, we absolutely are going public on this. And I hope that those foundations and funders in the room will take note of what's been said this afternoon, but also take time out after this event to meet with us, talk with us, and raise questions. In terms of the process today, we're going to, after my introduction, Stephen Bediako will be addressing you and really, I suppose, looking at the model of a racial justice-led fund. We'll then have some questions and answers and going into a tea break before a panel discussion of representatives from the social investment sector, and then we'll wind up with some closing remarks from Big Invest and from the National Community Lottery Fund. So without further ado, Stephen.
I'm going to leave the mic. Can people hear me? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Better for the recording?
To shout.
Yeah. Cool. All right. So amazing. Thank you everyone for making time. Sorry it's standing room only. But yeah, my name's Stephen Bediako. I guess I describe myself as a serial social entrepreneur. I've kind of founded a number of organisations in the UK. The Social Innovation Partnership, which is an agency that supports organisations to measure their impact, design programmes. I think the team are here today, so thanks for coming. And then also other organisations. But I'm also the founder of something called Black Global Trust, which is a fund focused specifically on supporting Black and Afro-Caribbean fund managers. So I'm super excited to be one of 3 partners delivering Pathway Fund, and grateful to Bonnie and Kunle for the journey, grateful to all those who've helped to make this happen, and grateful to you all for making time, and hopefully you will join us on this journey. And so I think what I'm going to do is just talk a little bit to, like, what is it? Like, why bother? And then I think we'll look to then kind of have a bit of a Q&A and a bit of feedback. So what we're trying to do, we're basically trying to build a wholesale fund that will sit between Big Society Capital, and for those who don't know what Big Society Capital is, it's the wholesale fund in the UK, 600 million from dormant accounts that's been building the social investment market, but primarily at one end, speaking to institutions trying to get money in. And we want to sit between Access Fund. And I think there are colleagues from Access here today, and we're going to hear from Seb. And they sit at the other end of the market, where they're supporting enterprises to access, 100 grand, 200 grand, so that they can try and get into social investment, right? Build enterprises that have impact, but that also make money. And we think there's a gap. We think there's a gap for Pathway. We think there's a gap for a wholesaler that will just speak to Black and minoritized communities, right? And that will support them and support communities up and down the country to build social enterprise, right? To have an impact, but to also build ownership, value, and all those good things, right? So that's what we think. That's what we're trying to do. We did some research, we found a gap for it. And yeah, as Kunle said, the lottery have given us £500,000 to develop this. So we've got until early 2024 to essentially try and develop this fund and to try and raise a starting fund of £30 million. So that's what we're going after. And we want to do this by, is this going to work? There you go. We think there's 3 things that this organisation is going to do. And what we're going to do is we're going to pilot these 3 things over the next 12, 18 months to really make sure that we're adding value, to really make sure that we know how to do them, and to make sure that they work. And so one of them is enterprise development. So we're going to support enterprises to try and kind of access social investment. That's the pilots that Kunle talked about. We're also thinking about a kind of first time or a Black and Minoritised fund managers program, so that we both support on the enterprise side, but also on the fund managers side. So that's one. The second thing we're going to look at is what we're describing as asset acquisition. So we are going to be unashamed about saying we want communities to acquire assets, and we think that that will help people to build wealth, build ownership, maintain their power, and that's all part of this. And then the final thing we'll do, or the third thing we'll do, is kind of thought leadership and influencing, right? So just because we're setting this up, that doesn't mean that BSC or Access or any other CIFI gets off the hook around doing this work and being more diverse in the way they deploy their money, but we're obviously going to try and influence them and shape them. So those are the 3 pillars, really, of what this organisation hopefully is going to stand on, and absolutely excited and honoured to have Dilys coming on as board as our founder director to lead that. And I think that's it. And the goal is that we're going to aim to try and build a 30 million fund by kind of late 2024. I think we're also looking for partners, right? We're looking for people who want to come on this journey. You want to challenge us? Great, come and challenge us. You want to help us? Great. You want to fund us? We're also looking for organisations that will be part of that development journey, right? So there's no kind of application process or anything like that at the minute. It's all early stage, right? It's just like, how do you develop these pilots, get the learning, and then hopefully we can launch more substantially in early 2024. So yeah, I think that's kind of the crux of it. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Obviously grateful to the lottery. We're talking to a number of funders who hopefully support the work, and yeah, just really looking for partners to develop this. So I think now we're going to do a bit of Q&A and kind of open it up to discussion and feedback and questions, whatever it might be.
Okay, well, there's a microphone if people need it, which want to ask a question or a comment, certainly just indicate by raising your hand.
Please.
Sure. Hello, I'm Hannah. I'm a current on-purpose associate at Bridges Outcomes Partnerships. I'm just really interested in the asset acquisition pilot. If I can hear a little bit more about kind of maybe an example of the kind of thing that would fall in under that, that would be really good to hear about. Thanks.
Is there any other questions? Maybe take a couple. Any other reflections? Oh, okay, great.
Hi, I'm Tara Sabri Collier from Oxford University, and I'm curious what you're thinking in regards to, kind of related to this, employee shared ownership as part of wealth creation for Black minoritized communities.
Let's take one more. And then...
Hi, I'm Jennifer Ogole. Hi, Kunle, and very well done for getting this off the ground. My question, well, it's actually a statement really. It's the response to the call for partners and really highlighting the need for young people to be included in this as a, you know, an even more excluded group within the group that you're serving already.
Clarification on asset acquisition.
So, really, the answer to your question, in fact, lies in this room. You've got Janet over there from Claudia Jones, one of the organisations in Hackney that own their own building, and it's a rarity. When we looked into the research on this, probably about 10 years ago, there was no doubt that in terms of community organisations, you had a 40% better chance of survival through the ownership of your own building than any other kind of organisation. Jennifer over there from Brent is involved in a project called Picture Palace, which is the development of a digital hub in northwest London, and probably one of the pilots that we're going to be supporting. So for us, it's a very important strand, but there are other organisations who I would say are undercapitalised, but also rely heavily on volunteers for their outlook. We need to scale up some of these organisations and bring them to a point where sustainability becomes a reality rather than lurching from emergency to emergency. And I think that's one of the really key components of Pathway.
So hi everyone, I'm Bonnie Chiu, one of the 3 partners, and responding to asset acquisition and also linking to employee ownership. One of the issues we are very focused on addressing is the wealth gap in this country. So we've referred multiple times to the Colour of Money report by Running Meat Trusts, which sees that Black communities, Bangladeshi communities in particular, own only less than 1/10 of the wealth of white communities. So part of it is enabling Black and minoritized-led organizations to own and acquire the assets that will help them generate revenue. But it's also another part, how can communities own their housing assets, own perhaps green assets? We've been in our team thinking a lot about the topic of just transition and the intersection of climate change and racial justice. So we have a broad view on asset acquisition, not just looking at enterprises, but also communities coming together to own the assets. And I think that kind of speaks to employee ownership. In impact investing or in social investment, we often look at the business model on how it can create impact, and we don't look enough at the ownership, who actually owns and makes decisions in these enterprises. And we think it's, in order for us to achieve racial equity, it is ultimately about power and who gets to decide. So it's really important that we can look at employee ownership models. There are a few funds in the US that we've gotten inspiration from, whereby investors can provide investment for employees to come together to take over the company. And we think there's a huge gap. I mean, it's not just Black and Minoritized community, but even broader than that. We haven't seen much around employee ownership, but we hope that pathway under our pillars, we can help advance perhaps the creation, if our capital can help catalyze the creation of an employee ownership fund, then we'll be very happy to do that. And the final point about young people, yes, definitely. I think we used to be young, but no longer. So we do need to think about young people. And this is a conversation that I have with Kunle and Stephen a lot. And as a woman, I always challenge them on gender, and it's a live conversation, and we try to really hold ourselves accountable to this idea of intersectionality. I mean, racial equity is our starting point, but we need to make sure we're inclusive in all dimensions, and class diversity. I mean, all sorts. So that's something that we're thinking a lot about, and we will also encourage you as our community of early supporters to hold us accountable to that as well. Stephen, do you want to?
No, nothing really to add to that. Just that, young people. Yes, I used to be young one day before in the past, so very close to my heart. And as someone that's just also spent the last 5 years in the States building a co-op, definitely also passionate about employee ownership and just the whole ownership question. I think that's kind of the battle that we're facing at the minute.
On the youth question, I would just add that in terms of the discussions we've had around pathway, as I said, go back several years. But if we're absolutely honest, it's been the Black Lives Matter protests of 2020 and the pandemic, which has really brought matters to a head in terms of the understanding of foundations and donors. Without the role of those young people in making those protests, I doubt if we would be in this room today. So we have to acknowledge that, but also I think we don't talk about it perhaps enough, but there is a leadership strand within Pathway, which is to bring those young people in to become that next layer of leaders. We're not going to be around forever, but certainly, again, in all honesty, there are lots of discussion about racial justice and anti-racist thinking, but I still see the same faces that I saw 20 years ago leading those initiatives. And I think there has to be a clearing of the decks, and new blood has to come into that space. And I'm definitely up for that.
Yeah, I think Kunle, you answered quite a few of the points I wanted to make about young people. The youth are really important. They are current. It's not something that, in the distance, they're hanging around. They are here right now. They're not taking no for an answer. They see things completely differently to me as an old person. I've worked with quite a few youth groups, and I just remember going in with traditional pillars around education, employment and empowerment, and they looked at me and they were just talking about, well, mobility, joy, imagination, seeing things in a complete different way. And this is where the innovation is. It's where new ideas come from. And I think there's something about trusting the young people, as opposed to participation being get young people around the room, listen to their ideas and do something with it. I think it's really important that young people drive. I'm going to give you a shout out, Mercy, because I've been working with Mercy on the Children We Move Fund, which is all about investing in Black children and young people. And in terms of my role, I could go in and say we're going to design a beautiful programme, loads of nice little outcomes and outputs, but that's not what it's about. It's about the legacy, and it's about me and my role being there to facilitate that change to happen.
More questions or reflections, please, hands up. It's great, amazing.
Thanks. And just following up on that point, actually. Pardon? Oh yeah, sorry. I'm Harming Chan from the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. Just following up on that point, just wondering how are you going to build in co-production and co-design first and co-production into the program? It'd be great to hear about that.
Any other questions?
Hi, Samuel Binducci here. There are a few models around these days about what you just spoken about, and I've lived long enough to know that such schemes do come. I hope sort of to achieve the outcomes, because ultimately it's the Black community that benefits. But at the moment, I can point to about at least 3 of such models in place. I want to know whether you have any plans at all of actually working collaboratively with them to achieve even a greater impact for the Black community.
Yeah.
One more question?
Hi everyone, I'm Anushka. I work at the Charities Aid Foundation. I have a quick question for Bonnie as a follow-up to what you said about closing the racial wealth gap. Do you envision that your funds will be able to be deployed to non-asset locked bodies? And how does that fit with thinking around not just the impact on communities, but the impact on individual founders and their ability to make money while doing good?
Hi, I'm Mercy Shvemba, Chair of the Social Investment Partnership, and I've also been leading with Dilys on the We Move Fund. I have 2 questions. What are your, I don't obviously need details, but in terms of your plans to engage Black and Brown communities within Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland? I grew up in Cardiff, so I'm always just conscious of the often London-centric nature of initiatives like this. And Dilys, I know we've talked a lot about this over the time we've worked together, but what is the plan in terms of retaining culture as a key cornerstone in this and not replicating flat corporate style models that we've seen time and time again?
Great question. Yeah. On the co-production issue, certainly we're looking at not just organisations that we at Voice4Change have worked with for a long time. I'm also in the middle of actually going out and doing a serious outreach work. In fact, I'm in Nottingham tomorrow, talking to groups about this project and also the other strands that I mentioned earlier. I'm also meeting straight after this meeting groups from London. So, and our plan is to also do some targeted work in Yorkshire. Particularly West Yorkshire and Bradford and Leeds. So the co-production element is quite important, but right from day one, we've always, at Voice4Change, used engagement and our listening skills to shape our policy developments. And I'm sure that in terms of pathway, we certainly want to not only develop the fund, but we want people in localities to develop their own tailored funds as well. So that's one of the, I suppose, the unique properties of this project. The other questions were?
Collaborate with other initiatives.
Yeah, the Black Equity Organisation, I suppose, Baobab are all initiatives which are of interest and have all been invited here today. In fact, I was involved in the early development of the Phoenix Way as well, and we know all of these characters and have discussions with them continually. So you've got Derek there, who also has been one of the kind of thinkers behind a number of these initiatives, and he's here today to not only link with Pathway, but to link us to those other projects that he's involved in too. So I think that there's definitely going to be collaboration, but I would like to think also it has to be principled collaboration and not just an open-ended blank check. By that I mean we need to do something different. As I said, there are too many old men who've been around a long time still peddling the same stuff, and we've got to break through that.
So I think just a quick note on co-production. We all know that if we use the same methods as organisations that have gone before us, we'll get to the same destination. So we do need to challenge our ways of working, and a key part of that would be implementing co-production. So it might even involve, and we're hoping that we can do as part of enterprise development, supporting enterprises to get investment ready, that we're not just getting them ready for the same types of investment out there. Let's actually redesign what financing instruments with racial equity baked in look like. I mean, it might be a bit bold, but that's hopefully where we'll get to, and that's where we can implement and embed co-production. In terms of giving, channeling funding to non-assets locked organizations, I think it's an ambition. I think currently with our funding from the lottery, it will be assets locked, and different foundations will have different requirements in relation to that. But we do think it's a very core part of addressing the racial wealth gap. And Matthew, who's leading the Growth Impact Fund, I remember she wrote an article about actually how this idea of assets locked is inhibiting Black and minoritized communities from becoming wealthier, because we're locking their assets so that we oftentimes white wealth holders can kind of preserve their capital that way. So yeah, there's something to be said about how can we back enterprises, and we have Andy who'll be speaking a bit later from the VC world, and I think that is the part of the puzzle that we want to address as part of this. Kunle, do you want to speak about Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland?
Yeah. My own charity during the pandemic developed its own grant funding capability and took delegated authority from major charities like Comic Relief, Mind and Sport England. Taking that on board, we made a decision that even though we're known as Voice4Change England, we had to go outside our own kind of national base. And so we now have relationships in Wales, in Northern Ireland and Scotland, which we are continuing to develop. Charmin, who's over there, who heads up our grants team, knows full well that may have implications constitutionally for us further down the line. Voice4Change England may become Voice4Change UK. I don't know, but that's, I think, one of my trustees is here, and she'll have to think about that. But one of the, I suppose, organisational pieces in terms of the development phase of Pathway is around governance. And we need to put in structures, new structures, in terms of how Pathway is going to be run. Whether it's going to be an arm's length operation outside of Voice4Change, or it's going to be a completely new entity. In the next 18 months, we have to make a decision on that.
Just coming in flash. Yeah, just coming a couple bits. On the co-production piece, agree with what's been said. The only bit I would add is that I think one of the things we have to do is get quite clear about, the kind of straw person. I think we've got to get through that development phase and have something that we can then work on with people and co-produce, rather than blank page and co-produce, because I think that can then create a scenario of like, what are we doing, which way, blah, blah, blah. So I think there's something about, we need to get to a certain place and then run a real effective co-production process. The other thing I'd say as well is just on the other initiatives piece, I think it's great, partner, collaborate. The social sector is a jigsaw. There's roles for everyone to do. But what I would point out is that, in this space of building initiatives that are focused on Black and minoritized communities, we want to build a marketplace, right? We want to build a marketplace of initiatives. Nobody said when BSC were creating SIFIs that there can only be one or two. Now there's like 25 of them. So we're very comfortable with having lots of initiatives working in this place, and that's what we should be aiming for. And then the other piece, just on, how we're going to make sure we keep the culture, we're going to make sure we keep the culture. This is not an assimilation exercise. I think what we want to do, and I think you'll see that in how this team grows and the work grows. And, again, I'll just be very honest. I think when this social investment piece first landed, it was all very driven by ex-investors with a social investment or an investment mindset. And I think we've got to get the balance right when driving these initiatives, with people with an impact mindset, with whatever cultural background. They also need to be at the front making the decision. Just because it's about the movement of money, it doesn't mean that the people with expertise in moving money get to dominate the conversation and how we set our strategy. So yeah, just wanted to kind of add a few points on that. Okay, cool. So I think we are going to take a 10-minute coffee break now. So coffee should be here. People can also filter out and use the restroom and take a seat, sorry. And then we're going to come back at 3 p.m. and we're going to have our panel discussion, which again, you know, we're going to compress a little bit, make that a good discussion and create space for people to network and communicate and catch up with each other. So we're going to take a break now for 10 minutes for a coffee. Thank you.
Great, well, welcome back. We will have a networking break very shortly, so don't worry, you'll get to enjoy the cakes and the tea and coffee. But right now we're just going to have a panel discussion, and our topic today is how do we create system change for racial equity in finance? I mean, after all, Pathway is a wholesaler initiative. We really want to make sure that we are creating change at that systems level. So I think there's a lot of entry points thinking about system change for racial equity in finance. So we can talk about underrepresentation of people of color, particularly Black professionals in leadership in finance. We can look at many data points that speak to the lack of access to capital for minoritized entrepreneurs. I think, some people in this room have done lots of research around it. To also the deep-rooted wealth and income inequalities that I've just mentioned in the beginning. So I want to make sure that in this panel we go beyond the why, because I think we're all here because we know why it's important to create racial equity in finance. So it's really about how do we make things happen on that systems level. So I have a great panel with me today. So I won't introduce themselves too much. I think you can all see their titles here. We've sent out their impressive bios as a pre-read to the confirmation of this event today. But they're all bringing different perspectives around how they're creating system change. So we'll ask the panelists each to make around 3 to 5 minutes remark. They will each focus on how they are creating system change for racial equity and what are some of the lessons learned. We don't want to just hear about what's working well, but also what's not worked well, so that we know how we can improve. And we probably learn the most from failures anyway. And of course, the final point is whether they have any hopes for the future, whether there are things that we can, as Pathway, help them on their journeys, or whether they would like to see Pathway drive system change on any other aspects. And we'll have time for kind of 1 or 2 questions afterwards, but we want to make sure that you get to network as much as possible. So what we'll do is I'll ask you to visually remember the panelists that you want to speak to afterwards so that you can find them in the networking break. So with that in mind, can I just do it like this? So Seb, would you like to go first? I'll keep time as well, so I'll steal your mic when you go over time.
Thanks so much, and Bonnie, thank you. Great to be here, and huge congratulations to everyone involved in getting Pathway to this point. We're so excited to be with you on this journey. So I'm Chief Exec of Access, the Foundation for Social Investment. Have been for about 7 years, and our role really is to support the development of the social investment ecosystem in England by using grants. So we put grant into funds to create blended funds, and we put grant into capacity building and enterprise development programs to help more organisations to be able to benefit from enterprise and use that as a way of becoming more resilient. And we have a particular focus at the kind of community end of the market. So, you know, a typical organisation we might be supporting perhaps is turning over £250,000, has about 5 staff. That's the kind of scale we're talking about. And we don't do that work directly. We do it through a whole range of different partners and intermediaries right around England, based in different communities. So in terms of how we're trying to create systems change for racial equity, I guess 3 different ways, I'd say. The first is about, as Bonnie's just mentioned, access to finance for Black and minoritised community-led organisations. And for some of those organisations, the barriers to accessing finance are similar to other community-based organisations. It's about size, it's about the marginal nature of the business model. But we also are learning through the work of our partners that many of those barriers to accessing finance are different. Barriers around perceptions of debt, inherently undercapitalised and underinvested organisations over many years, and organisations that are in different networks and not not networked in the traditional social investment networks. And so what we've been doing is baking the objective of increasing access to finance for these organisations into all of our work. And so if you take our flexible finance programme, for example, which makes grant available to social investment fund managers for them to then develop patient, flexible, equity-like finance for charities and social enterprises, there are three objectives that they have to meet. One is that they are creating those new products. Two is that they are leveraging in new capital into the world of social investment. And number three is that they are clearly demonstrating how they are going to serve those organisations that haven't previously had that access to finance around Black and Minoritised community-led organisations, and setting targets for how that's going to happen. And we have turned down proposals from managers who were very good at the first two and just weren't able to demonstrate a clear plan around the third. That work around increasing access to finance also extends to our enterprise development work, and we've been partnering with Abele for the last couple of years on a specific programme for Black and minority ethnic-led organisations who are looking to develop enterprise models that may go on to be something that they need social investment for, but more generally are helping to diversify their income. The second area really is by specifically supporting organisations whose mission is to tackle structural inequality, and we've been doing this principally on the enterprise development side. Again, as all our work is in partnership, this is with Equally Ours and a range of other partners focused on different structural inequalities, and that work was very much inspired by the Equality Impact Investing programme. And then the third area is supporting specific infrastructure projects. So we've, principally this is through our work on the Connect Fund, which is run by Barratt Cadbury Trust, where we have supported a number of initiatives like the Diversity Forum, like the Equality Impact Investing Project at a national level, but also a number of regional projects, including one in the Southwest, including one in Greater Manchester, and other sector-specific research pieces that are really looking at kind of specifically what are these barriers and how does the community come together to access resources to overcome them. And of course, we have to get our own house in order as well. Access is a relatively small organisation in terms of headcount. There's 9 of us, so we have to pull the levers and make sure we're doing this ourselves. We have a new equity, diversity and inclusion strategy that the board have agreed this year. We're focusing hard on our recruitment practices, both at executive and non-executive level, and crucially thinking about our governance and really what are the right measures for us to be comparing ourselves to, and quite a lot of work around that. So what are the lessons from this? Well, obviously we're on a journey, and the whole sector is. The governance point, I think, has been an interesting point, and sort of how we have changed the way our investment committee works to make sure these decisions are at the absolute heart, not only of our investment policy, but of the experience of people round the table. And as we were reframing our investment committee in 2020, we were exploring kind of different avenues of whether we should have a kind of advisory group looking at a kind of equality screening of this, or whether it should be baked into the heart of our investment committee process. And it became quite clear that it needed to be the latter, and Bio and other members of our investment committee are here in the room, and that's completely transformed our decision-making process, which has been enormously important. But it's not all been plain sailing. I think some of our partners have found this agenda challenging. I don't think we have been consistently as clear throughout the way we've delivered our programs about exactly what good looks like, partly because we're figuring that out, and they are figuring that out, but I think that's not always been super straightforward. The asset lock challenge is one that has already been mentioned, that is a real issue for us as a registered charity using public money. That is a conundrum which we know we need to work through. But I think I would, on a more positive note, I would say I think we've really shown that blended finance is a tool that can make an enormous impact here, both blending in structures to allow the social investors to take the kinds of to create the kind of products and take the kind of risk that's needed, but also in the blended products that really help organisations to start to move on this agenda. And the work of social investment business, for example, with the Recovery Loan Fund, is a great example of how that can work in practice. So in terms of working with Pathway, we're so excited about Pathway getting off the ground and building our partnership. I mean, to be clear and for the avoidance of doubt, we don't see this as a reason that we're going to let up at all on this agenda. If anything, it's going to reinforce our work on this agenda, and I'm really confident about how we're going to be able to build a partnership. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and together I'm sure we can do that. Our mandate is quite specific. I think the vision that colleagues here have outlined is perhaps is broader. The property angle I think is critical and really, really important. That's something that we wouldn't do ourselves, and we can help support. And hopefully supporting a broader range of organisations as well. So we're really looking forward to the partnership and delighted to be here.
Hi everyone, and just to echo Seb's comment at the beginning, this is so exciting to see, and also I have to say kind of big, huge congratulations to Kunle, Bonnie, Stephen, and the people behind us, because it's not easy to get this work off the ground, and it takes time, it takes toil, it takes energy, and the fact that you've risen above it and kind of like taken that on, I think is a huge testament to the three of you, and I hope this is just the beginning in terms of future events where this kind of like ecosystem and this kind of collaborative atmosphere, I think, growing more and more, especially. So I guess just very quickly, I mean, I won't go to delve into who I am, but I'll just, from my perspective, I'm going to kind of come to the question in three ways. So effectively, first of all, in terms of system change, so I chair the Diversity Forum. I don't know, for those who don't know who the Diversity Forum is, we were set up by Bonnie and Gemma a while ago, in terms of back in 2017, I think, to really look at the big challenge within the social investment sector around representation in terms of the makeup of the social investment funds and funders, and how they weren't reflective of the communities they were looking to serve, and really kind of work with from a social investment perspective. So the idea of Diversity Forum is to be a cross-sector collaborative group, independent from any particular group or funder, to really look at how you can improve diversity and representation within the social investment sector. It's fair to say over the last 5 years we've been on somewhat of a journey, somewhat of an up and down journey, in the sense of, I think there was an initial real want and kind of desire for Diversity Forum to be around, and the energy was there, but in terms of it actually leading to substantial change, that's been much slower. And I'll just focus on the last year in terms of some of the work we've done, and I'd have to say also a big shout out to Salma, who's somewhere in the audience, hidden, but her work around kind of helping us really take forward our agenda has been instrumental. So this year we launched our new manifesto. So what our manifesto is a public pledge that we want funders and investors to take when it comes to actually talking about diversity, talk about representation, talk about some of the things we want them to do, and not just say it in words, but really lead it to action. So we put together a manifesto, as well as, I say we, I mean Sam, put together a manifesto and an action-orientated plan, and we now have 17 signatories, which is great, but there's still much more funders out there who haven't signed it. So if you are one of those funders that haven't signed it and you're in this room, can you ask yourself why that is? Because I think that's a big gap in terms of your rhetoric versus what you're actually doing. Where we like to go with the Diversity Forum to really look at, I think, how do we drive system change? So moving away from just a signature and a pledge, what do we actually need to do to help the sector think about how it can enact change? And quite exciting, next year we are looking at running a stream of programs. So there's a big focus on data, really think about actually, do we know the makeup of the sector in terms of the people that work here, where they're from, what are the trends we're seeing, and to build on the research report that we launched 5 years ago, and actually has there been change. So that's a big area for us. The other is working with the signatories who've signed the manifesto to help them think about what are the internal blockers that you have to bring about change in your organisation when it comes to representation and diversity, and what could we do as a forum, as well as also the work we can do to help you to kind of push that agenda forward. And then the third area is to really think about how do we tell the story better of the people who work in the sector, because there are lots of diverse people who work in the sector. They've all come at it in different ways and they've all had different experiences. What we don't do is tell the story of what they've experienced and what they've gone through, because we as a sector like to do case studies or various things about where investments work. This is telling the human side of the sector, and I think that's a really big missing gap from what we have. So those are some of the kind of key areas of our focus for next year. So what we're hoping to do, really, when it comes to system change, is work collaboratively with partners to really think about, okay, move away from the rhetoric, move away from saying you're into diversity and you have an EDI framework, into actually thinking about the people who work there, and across all different levels, everything from junior levels to mid-management, and also at right at the top, at the chief executive level, where we do have a real problem around diversity the higher up you go in the social investment sector. Part of the challenge is it's a small sector, you know, there's not as many opportunities in other areas. So what are the things we need to do to kind of help that as well? So from a diversity forum perspective, that's what we're looking to do around system change, which I think is really useful to flag. At Big Society Capital, where I work as a investor relations director, you know, we are also, similar to what Seb mentioned around kind of where access is, we are also on a learning journey. So what we are doing is really thinking about, you know, we've developed a 5-year plan around EDI, but really we need to embed it across every single part of what we do. So we are bringing someone in to bring the kind of EDI work that we've put together into our investment making process. We've done a lot of work to look at how we better have more representation in our investment committee. So, you know, we're looking at how that could be improved. And also really thinking about this work that we've been doing around kind of innovation and first-time fund managers, which is part of my work at Big Society Capital. Next year, what we're going to be doing is running a thematic program focusing with a racial equity lens, and that's a really, really clear, strong, collaborative, you know, approach that we would like to take with Pathways, because partly what we want to do is think about some of those fund managers, but also think about actually how do you get more money to reach into diverse communities, how do you grow diverse fund managers. So I'm being told to hurry up, so I'm going to move on quickly. I guess from my experience, so what are the lessons learned? I mean, this work takes time. It's not easy, it's resource intensive, and it does require patience from funders, and also it requires buy-in from all levels of the organisation. So from top to bottom, it really needs that support and buy-in. I think on the diversity forum perspective and some of the challenges we've had is that we've seen a lot of rhetoric, but we haven't seen a lever for action or change. And I think part of the problem is the sector isn't able to at least contextualize this work as part of its strategic output. So what we want organizations to do is to really think about the manifesto as a way to kind of operate better and kind of work closer together. So, you know, I think collaboration is a key part of this. This is what we're looking to do. And what would I like to see in the future? I'm going to move forward because I feel like you're going to tell me to hurry up. Collaboration with Pathways is number one. I think doing work together is absolutely imperative. I think from a BST perspective, we're here to also learn and to kind of work with Pathways from a perspective of actually, you know, there's a lot that we want to go forward with. So this is where collaboration I think is really useful. And I think in terms of future, I think for me, it's like how can Pathways help the sector hold itself to account more and also do it from an action-orientated perspective. I'm going to stop. I feel like I've gone on my time.
Thank you so much, Amir. Thank you.
Hey all, good to see you all. My name is Andy Davis, founder partner at 10x10 Capital, which is a pre-seed fund investing in exceptional black founders before the market knows they exist. So I meet a founder, they're brilliant, I'm like, are you raising money? They say, no, I say perfect. And I'm like, great, that's where we come in. We do that, what I call secret round, which is the equivalent of a friends and family round, I guess, and invest upwards to about 250 max. And it's a fund I'm closed now. Doing the first close off and the second close. First half of next year, just focus on black founders. And I think it's interesting with that work because a lot of friends of mine start similar funds and have here in Europe and in the US, and they go to raise capital for these funds and they start off investing in black founders, and then when they launch you see it's diverse founders, which is interesting, and it just shows you the lack of conviction and commitment from the funding partners globally actually when it comes to actually doing the work. And someone like myself, I think I just stick, right? I stick and I stay true, hopefully, and go to get the work done every single day. By way of background, I spent some time angel investing and on the VC end, and spent time as a founder, and also run a group of all the black VCs in Europe. And the purpose of that is to get more black people into venture. When they're there, actually I'm going to jump a little bit with questions and stuff around some lessons. So even forming a group of all these black VCs in Europe to get more black people into venture capital, we're doing these quarterly calls where we all get together and just talk about how do you progress black founders and get them funded. And I remember in the summer, someone said, "Oh, what about us?" And I was like, "What about us? Right? Everyone's got a job, whatever, everyone's fine." They're like, "No, because a lot of us still sit in these organisations as the only black person, and we have to be able to thrive in these organisations as well." I was like, so then, okay, that creates a bit more work, but actually important work as to what we're doing for that community as well. And hopefully the end result will be and is becoming funding for black founders. So part of the system change that I guess I get the privilege of making every day is progress in black founders getting funded and helping more black people get into venture capital and then enabling them to thrive in those roles and change it overall. I think if there are more black people in these roles, I just know that actually other forms of diversity follow as well, right? And I talk to a lot of the partners at the funds as well, and just to get a true understanding of how much you truly care about this, right? And why and what, and we do our best to help people prepare for getting into these positions and making sure that they are excellent when they're there, right? And just excellent as everyone else is, and if not better when the playing field is leveled. System change when it comes to funding black founders. I think I do a bunch of things. I said there's the invest piece, yes, but I also do my best to create access as well. So where if there's I see a deal, and I think usually people think you have to have a lot of money to angel invest. So we form these syndicates, these groups where anyone can put about £1,000 in, and I just do open calls sometimes once a month. I'm like, hey, we're going to talk to a bunch of founders. Excuse me. I'm like, does anyone else want to come along and just listen? If you're interested in investing potentially, here's like a piece of information, here's a deck or something, presentation on the business. Come along if you so wish, and listen. If you're interested, you can put £1,000 in. And we've done it a few times where you've got these 30, 40 individuals, and they'll get to 40,000, 100,000 pounds and stuff. And all of a sudden, people who would never consider investing before, or consider themselves like able to get into technology besides that through the public markets. There's now this path in, right? And that's now us just doing the right work, doing similar work here. I believe we share a DNA, the pathway, and hence the alignment. I think of us just creating access, and that piece is just increasingly remarkably important. I'm good. I'll jump a little bit. So on some lessons, I find that it's interesting with a group of black VCs. Those was activities that were in place to happen this year and next. And as I got busy with the fund, maybe as founder of the group, those activities took a pause, right, or slowed down a bit. And it taught me a lesson that actually one person can't be the reason something happens, right? And we need to create things that last and actually have impact, and how we can all contribute collectively. So that's part of my December, actually, spending time just thinking a bit more about that and the way to bring everyone in and not being, never about me, even through me. I can be the connecting point, but I shouldn't be the reason anything actually happens. There needs to be things in place that I can contribute equally to as everyone else can as well, and make it, in my opinion, as light touch as possible, so there is no friction. And I think we have to do this for all partners, people in this room as well, right? And we have to make it frictionless that everyone can contribute, and that's through articulation of the offerings, how to best go about it, and the work that we do as well. Yeah, I probably forgot a question or two.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, I think the first question was around systems change. You know, how do we, myself in my career, try to create that? And I've always tried to approach it from, okay, what is the system? You know, with the various groups, communities, countries I've worked in, we all have our conceptions of the system, and the aim being for systemic change. And so I always start at the standing point of, okay, how does each group see the system? What does it look like and mean for them? And then that gives me like an answer into, okay, the different perspectives, and you also start to see some of the solutions. I think that's quite key in terms of seeing that. In terms of my work, what I've tried to do in terms of where the investment goes and black communities is to see the strength and value of infrastructure organisations. I remember years ago, you know, even today, you know, funders looking at, you know, we need to build the capacity of frontline organisations, and always thinking, okay, but we've got these great infrastructure organisations who are the capacity builders, you know, the backbone and the tentacles into the communities. And so in terms of systems change, you know, I've worked to develop funds that are investing in these infrastructure organisations so that they can go and do that capacity building work. I've also looked at data. In terms of systems change, for me data is really important. Data tells you what's there, but also what's missing. It's also, for me, important to understand who is generating that data and what are they using it for, and to work towards having the communities that I'm there to serve generating and leading the data, where they are there looking at what questions do you want to ask, where do you want this data to go, and how and where do you want to influence, and that data being like a living, breathing, I don't say animal, but really is, something that changes over time, and using that data to guide what we're doing. Finally, yes, what's important is, tells the system, cultural competency. Ensuring that whether it's a funder, an investor, being able to ask ourselves, are we fit for purpose? Am I competent in what I'm doing? And also always being learning. So yeah, in terms of that systems change, that's always how I've tried to approach it. Now, in terms of what I've learned and lessons, I'll go back to data again. Data, and also asking yourselves, who's at the table and who isn't. Gosh, I remember before they used to say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And so that always rings true, and I always try to see, okay, who am I missing out here? Who are we missing out? In terms of some of the work I've done and where this bears fruit is, I was based in Ethiopia for 3 years, working with a child sponsorship organisation. And I immediately saw, okay, there's a challenge in the model, because child sponsorship meant that you could fund, one young person within a family. And so what that led to was to exacerbate gender inequality, because typically parents would, send the boy to school. Also saw, in terms of the sponsorship model, it led to a dependency. And so, where part of the mandate was poverty alleviation. And so, worked to speak to families, communities, to understand where they saw the system, where they saw the barriers, and how that investment could be used for themselves. And in a nutshell, what I did was to understand, in terms of the system, you had ready, able and willing families and parents who wanted to go out to work. Some of the families had small enterprises. And with the sponsorship model, the question was, okay, what is the data telling us around impact? How many of these young people are going through school, finishing school, and going on to jobs? Very few. And so that's where the data was important. And using that data to work with board and trustees and community to do a shift from sponsorship to community development, where we're able to redeploy the resources into the families that already had businesses. We were able to, rather than sponsors or donors funding latrines, Ethiopia is a socialist country, so if you know, that's not really going to work because families don't actually own that asset, and latrines are seen for something of the wealthy. So I brought those two things together, and just not myself, it's a whole team effort, but looked at that transition to community development, meaning that developed community facilities, latrines, kitchens, bathroom facilities owned, operated and managed by those communities. And so, going back to where is the system, it meant really understanding the system that those communities lived in. They understood and understand where the change is, and also using the data to show that the current model just wasn't working. And to say that in terms of sustainability and impacts, that's also key. With that transition, able to go on the support of the Ethiopian government and other governments, and what that goes back to is showing that sustainability, showing that impact, and I think it goes back to what Amir said about collaboration. It's key. It takes a whole system effort and all actors coming together. In terms of the final question, I think it was around in the future. Because in the future, ideally, we wouldn't need to be here. I mean, successfully would be that we cancel ourselves out here, and racial equity is mainstreamed into what we're doing. I've been doing some work supporting on the We Move Fund with BBC Children in Need, and there are questions around, why do we need a specific fund for Black children and young people? And I guess the reason why we need it is because Black children and young people are disproportionately underinvested in. Also, why we need it is that once we have some form of systemic change, we can start to mainstream what we're learning from that programme into the overall practices of the organisation itself. Also, to finally end on data, how important it is. There are a lot of Black and ethnic minoritized talents out there who conduct, commission, do research, and really we should be plugging into those groups. Where I see opportunity is that Pathway is a great interlocker between philanthropy, the communities, and social investment. I see Black philanthropy as huge, so untapped. I think an amazing Black Giving report came out, and it was like, finally, but also I think it got through in 2022, and we are now talking about Black philanthropy. And what that report showed was that there's a need first. What it also showed is that there's lack of an ecosystem or infrastructure to really harness that Black philanthropy for it to really flourish and thrive. And so, yeah, in terms of the future, what it looks like, we will be mainstreaming, racial equity. We will be tapping into Black philanthropy itself. And I guess finally, Pathway, we just have many partners and actors, in the space.
Great. So I also want to say that actually all three of them here are on our advisory board, and of course Dilys is our project director. So of course they are all very instrumental to the direction of Pathway and where we can travel next. I just want to see if there burning question from the audience. Yeah, Patricia.
Thanks. Patricia Hamzavi. I'm actually the commissioner of that Give Black report onto Black philanthropy, but my question is not for the lovely Dilys. My question is actually for Andy Davis. So, as you know, Andy, I work very actively in the world of diversifying access to funding from the VC sector into Black founders. And I'm also, as Bonnie knows, very active in the social investment space as well. Given the limited funding available for for-profit organizations led by Black founders, how optimistic do you see? I mean, I think 30 million fund is excellent and wonderful, but it's still a drop in the ocean. How optimistic, or do you see some competition for funding? Or I'm just trying to see when we will see any funding of scale that will be going in the social investment sector if it's not going into the for-profit sector.
Patricia, thanks for the question. So people spend a lot of time just calling me the stupid optimist. They're like, you're just so ridiculously optimistic, and I'll stay that way. I think I was talking to another fund manager, Black fund manager, this afternoon, and she called. She was like, hey, she's being quite shy and sheepish, and she was like, hey, well, I know you've got these investors. I wondered if you could maybe put in a word for me, or whatever. And she was talking. And I was like, what do you want? And she was like, what do you mean? I said, do you want introductions to my investors? And she said, yes. I said, you should ask. I said, well, I already know who I'm going to introduce you to. So I think part of our additional burden, fortunately or unfortunately, is that when we do unlock capital and resource that's in this room and other rooms, we have to do the work to also enable others to access that as well, right? And I think something I'm doing from the end of Q1 with my investors, I've told them all If you invest in my fund, every quarter I want to run a meeting where you meet 3 to 4 other black fund managers, and instead of them being in the market raising for 18 to 24 months, you just meet them there, and hopefully they can get going in a quarter, right? And I think we have to just make more efforts like that and activities like that. That's really important. On the amount of capital, I just think that what's important is that we've got capital to work in the right places. Capital going to the wrong places, in my opinion, just an opinion here, is unhelpful. I get told every day, oh hey, you've got the brand, go and raise 50 to 100 million. I was like, well, because it would take the same amount of time as raising 10 or whatever. And I'm like, listen, right, if I had 100 million right now, I'd throw it in the air, and I don't know who would catch it, right? And I think, but 2-3 years out from now, that's different. And I think that's just my quite deep understanding as to where early stage funding is and where early stage black founded companies are, right? I think that's just me wanting us to be responsible and just prove out that we can generate phenomenal returns, and we put money to work in high impact organizations as well. So is there a lack of capital at the moment? Will 30 million or 10 million or 50 elsewhere, 100 with Impact X and Co be enough? I think for the next, just in my opinion, for the next 3-4 years going ahead, I think yes for now. But I think what's critical is us putting money to work in the right places.
Do you want to add anything? I think for Pathway as well, it's really important to show that Black and minoritized communities are not, this is not charity, and this is or actually communities, and which is why I thought Dilys' example is great. You move from that child sponsorship model, which is seeing them as beneficiary, to seeing them as communities with assets that can generate their own wealth, and that agenda is really core to Pathway, because there's this mindset shift that needs to happen for our communities no longer to be seen as just those needing help. But I'll draw this to a close now so that we can have time for networking. But do pick up with any of the panelists if you are interested to ask them questions or grill them further. I want to thank all of you for joining us. Can you just give a round of applause? And our last bit is for two special guests to give some closing remarks. So we have Gemma from the lottery, who's our funder, who can give some quick remarks, and Danyal Sattar, who's maybe the only person of color leading a social investor, who's always been our guiding light. So, and of course we've worked together before, but Gemma, ladies first.
Also, I've heard Danyal speak before, and I'm never going after him. I was asked to say what the highlights of this afternoon have been, and I think it's over 5 years since Bonnie and I stood up in a dark room in Dorset or Devon with a gathering of about 150 social investors, and we tentatively asked them, put your hand up if you think there's a problem in social investment about race, and nearly everybody put their hand up. Only 5 put their hand up, so there's a gender problem, which surprises more. And at that point, there was lots of people who knew there was something not quite right about the sector not being quite as inclusive or reaching all the people who needed the funding, but nobody really knew what to do. And it's been a really long time to get to here, so actually really excited today to be here, for it to be announced, to meet Dilys, and to know that next year it's really going to accelerate, that we're going to see the pilots and the activities really taking off. There's lots of work that's been going on over the last 5 years, and things haven't stayed put, but this is a really quite a big landmark, and to see Dilys at the table will be a big thing to have a black woman there, so that's fantastic. So in terms of my takeaway for today, I suppose it's that thing that it's collaboration. It's not just about pathways, it's the problem for all of us to fix and for all of us to make an inclusive sector, so that, I think Andy said, so that it's somewhere that people can really thrive and flourish in these organisations. So that's not just about the organisations who receive the investment, but all the organisations who are making investment. So seeing more opportunities increase will be really exciting. And I think for those of us who work in this space, it's thinking about what we personally can do, and then what we can do in our professional capacities in the organisations we work with, and then what we can do collaboratively with each other. The next 10 years or so are going to be really challenging, the next few years are going to be challenging, but it's important we don't forget this agenda and really help to push it forward.
So it feels like we got the gang back together again, the co-chairs of the Diversity Forum from those years ago. So very good to be on the platform with you. I can't remember what you asked me to talk about, Bonnie, at the end. So I thought I'd write down a few things so I didn't forget my way. So I want to talk about 2 books and a conversation. But just to introduce myself, I'm Danyal Sattar. I'm the Chief Executive of Social Invest. We manage about £37.5 million worth of money across 3 FCA-regulated funds and our direct lending operation. So 24 staff, a small social investor, very proud to be in that role. So the 2 books and a short conversation. I read for pleasure, and I read all kinds of things. But I was reading a book where the protagonist, our hero of this book, was an administrator in a vast empire. And he had traveled from a distant corner of this empire to take on that role. And in taking on this now very senior role, he had made compromises in his life. He never compromised on the correct pronunciation of his home world, but he was prepared to compromise on how people pronounced his own name. Now, you've always all pronounced my name beautifully, by the way, so thank you all very much. But it made me reflect what compromises I had made in my career, what I had done to fit in. Please observe my cut glass BBC English accent. This is what you do to get to the top. So what compromises have I made in emphasizing mixed race, in emphasizing the white aspects of my mixed race background rather than the Bangladeshi aspects of my background? So in knowing that I was doing this speech, it was just interesting on a Monday evening finishing that book to come away with that reflection. The second thing, and why this is important, is that I was not at an event which Amir was at, and I'll talk about that event in just a minute. Amir was at Refuge. I was at the VocTech, the vocational training organisation, really good organisation. And I was chatting to some of the guests there, and I went up to somebody there and said, oh, so what do you do? To the guy who used to run one of the biggest hardware companies in the entire world. The entire internet goes through devices that he made. And I think he really enjoyed talking to somebody who just had absolutely no idea who he was. And he chairs a skills council, and I'll be kind of careful not to kind of identify that particular skills council. It's his story to tell and not mine. But they were encouraging the participation of women in this skills area. They had been doing this for 30 years because it was an area where women are not generally participating. And they looked at an academic study, and the study showed that the participation of women in this industry had increased. There were more women who did this particular thing. The reason was there are more people who work in that particular sector. And the number of women who'd increased in that sector was simply linear with the growth of that industry. So over 30 years, nothing had changed. So I said, so what do you do? You know, this is a guy who ran this massive company. And he said, okay, we shut down our most popular program, the one that we were really renowned for, the one that everybody thought was really good. We just shut it down. And we shifted to only doing regional programs because those are the ones that worked. So something didn't work, they had the evidence, they acted, they fixed it. I think that's what we're doing here in this room. Perhaps it takes us a little bit longer in our space to move, but we're moving as they moved. The third thing, as I said, I read to my shame, when I hit 50 a few years ago. You have to say, surely not. But when I hit 50 a few years ago, I realized to my shame I had not read any of Martin Luther King's works. I hadn't read any of them. If any of you have not read anything by Martin Luther King, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, good news.
Some of them are really short. So there's a particular book I recommend to you, and it's called Letters from Birmingham Jail. It's quite short. He probably didn't have much paper in Birmingham Jail to write these letters. And he was writing the letters to the Southern Baptist Church. And he was a member of the Southern Baptist Church. He was in jail because of his acts of civil disobedience, broke the law at the time in the United States of America. So he was writing to his fellow church leaders. And the observation that he had is that as individuals, he knew they were with him. He knew they were supporting him. But as an institution, the Southern Baptist Church at that moment in time did not support these acts of civil disobedience because they were breaking the law. So his observation was that individuals in the system would act in a better way than the institutions that they were within. A very interesting observation, and one that I think is still really live for us today. So this comes on to the next point I'd like to make, what we support when we are free. So I am not a refugee. I have not been a refugee. When my father was jailed as a political prisoner in Pakistan during the War of Independence, my mother, elder brother, and I simply came home to our family. We got on a plane and my grandparents looked after us. How wonderful that was. It makes me feel emotional thinking about it here. You know, I was not a refugee in the struggle that so many have. And good news, a year and a half later, we were reunited with my father. He survived, so many did not. So I have a particular empathy for our friends and colleagues who are refugees, because I didn't have a hard time of it. I was safe, I was loved. So RefuAid, the last investment I made at Joseph Rowntree Charitable Foundation, I can see Denise there at the back. Thank you so much for carrying on that extraordinary portfolio. And it was the last investment committee. And I was trying to make a case to the investment committee as to why we should make a 0% loan. Because it's a 0% loan to RefuAid. It means that RefuAid are technically not carrying out the business of investment. And it means that they can run this extraordinary fund that they have run. 260 people have benefited from 0% loans, £1.5 million. It's extraordinary. It's the fastest route out of poverty I think you'll ever see, when a former Syrian brain surgeon turns up in the United Kingdom and gets a job as a cleaner. If you requalify said brain surgeon to the top of his profession, you go from the minimum wage to a six-figure salary. They do that for doctors, nurses, pharmacists, air conditioning, engineers, truck drivers, an extraordinary organization. That is why I was not there and Amir was there, because Amir also funded RefuAid from Comic Relief. So a fantastic organization that we were both able to support. Neither of us can support that organization in our current organizations. I know that many people in Big Society Capital really are supporting that organization. They put in their time, they put in their effort. Very, very well done. But institutionally, we can't do what we would choose to do. I cannot do that in Big Issue Invest. I have to deliver a certain set of returns to my investors. Those are my legal agreements and binding. So that is why what we're doing here today is so important. We're creating a kind of money that can do the stuff that we really want to do, that lets us create an institution that's aligned with us as human beings. So that's why I think it's really, really important to do. So the final thing I will say is that sometimes boring is good, but what you have to do is do what you do again and again and again. And that's what I would ask of Seb at Access Foundation. I would say, please do that fantastic program that you did before, and they kind of do a few new and innovative things, and then they wheel out the fantastic program where everybody's really worked out how it works. Fantastic. The same thing of Big Society Capital. We have to do what works. But sometimes, as that distinguished colleague who ran a UK Skills Council found out, if it isn't working, you really ought to do something different. And that's what we've got to do today. So I sometimes think we're like rowers in a little boat, and sometimes we row against the tide. And you'll have heard me use this metaphor before, some of you. Rowing against the tide is really, really hard work. And sometimes that's what it's like. When I look around my colleagues in this room, you know how hard it is. It's really, really hard. So if rowing against the tide is hard, what do you do? And we're setting out a new boat to row against the tide. So 2 things that you can do to make that easier. Do a better job than me. Check the tide. Row with the tide. So enter the water at a different time. Perhaps this is a time where it will be easier. Perhaps it'll be that the tide will go with us. But the second thing you can do is do what people had to do before me, and that's reach into the sky and move the moon, because that is how you change the tide. So 25 years ago, Big Society Capital did not exist. Access Foundation for Social Investment did not exist. Fair for All did not exist. The Youth Foundation that was created did not exist. A civil society campaign, people like you and me here in this room, they campaigned. They got this Unclaimed Assets Commission together. That led to the Social Investment Task Force, and there were 2 of them. And that led to Ronnie, Sir Ronald Cohen. We call him Ronnie as a matter of respect. He's one of us. So Ronnie's commissions changed the way the government thought. Gordon Brown passed a law. The Conservative government got the naming rights. Big Society Capital came into being. And from 2010 onwards, it's financed the world. So 25 years ago, they were rowing against the tide. We were rowing against the tide. And the people of that time reached into the sky and changed the course of the moon. So that's what we are doing once again today. Thanks so much for taking this on.
Wisdom. Thank you so much. Now we'll just draw this to a close, and you're welcome to stay until past. We have continued to have more cakes and coffee and tea, but we'll follow up, and we'll also share the video recording and everything so that we can move this further together. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
So
Good job.
insightful with the reach for the moon. I didn't. Have you had that?